Let's take a look at every championship club and see where their managers were 5 years ago. Aston Villa, Steve Bruce. One of the most experienced managers on this list. Where was Steve Bruce 5 years ago? Probably still licking his wounds after getting driven out of Sunderland shortly after getting battered 5-1 by his hometown club. In 2013, he was recuperating from his northeast nightmare at Hull City, had just got the Tigers promoted, and not only was he about to keep them up, but he was about to do it in style, beating teams 6-0 along the way. Oh, and he also got them to an FA Cup final that season too. Not bad. Birmingham City, Gary Monk. Gary Monk is probably a man who's wondering what on earth has happened to that promising managerial career he once had. 2 years ago, he was the next big thing at Leeds United, showing up Swansea for giving him the boot. Now he's fighting for dear life to even remain relevant in the Championship. Anyway, 5 years ago, he was winding down the clock in South Wales as a player, having lifted the Carling Cup, or whatever it was called back then, in February 2013, beating Bradford in the final. What a joke of a competition. He'd soon be calling time on his playing days. Blackburn Rovers, Tony Mowbray. For a while there, it seemed like Tony Mowbray was hopping around clubs every 6 months. He's been up and down Britain over the last decade. I mean, his poor wife must be driven up the walls. But 5 years ago, in October 2013, he just left Middlesbrough after 2 wins in 12 games. Bolton, Phil Parkinson. It's a real shame that Phil Parkinson has been hailed as a hero at Bolton because he's managed to prevent them from ending up back in a division with Stevenage, Fleetwood and Rochdale. I mean, he's doing very well of course, but this is a club that was finishing 5th and getting results against Bayern Munich, Chelsea and Man United a little over 10 years ago. Before they got chopped for former Galacticos, now they have to settle for Shola Miobi's little brother. Anyway, 5 years ago, Parkinson was the cup specialist at Bradford. Despite them being rooted in League 2 at the time, he got a team with Curtis Good in it to a League Cup final, bypassing Arsenal on the way. Christ, AFTV would have been an absolute hoot back then. Special mention to Stephen Darby, by the way, who started right back in that final against Swansea. The former Liverpool defender has since been diagnosed with motor neuron disease. Thoughts are with him and his wife Steph Houghton. Oh and yeah, Parkinson was at it again 2 years later, coming back from 2-0 down against Chelsea in the FA Cup to smash 4 goals past the Blues in what was probably the first crack in Mourinho's second stint. Brentford, Dean Smith. Dean Smith has been at Brentford since 2015 and he's done well, despite walking into a club who inexplicably dumped Mark Warburton, a man who guided them to their highest finish in 80 years, in favour of some Dutch guy who lasted 9 games. Anyway, 5 years ago, Smith was a mid-table. League 1 also ran at Walsall. Bristol City, Lee Johnson. So here's Lee Johnson now, not to be confused with Gary Johnson, a man who was a Dean Windass folly away from guiding Bristol City into the top flight. And Gary's career has since slid down a drain pipe, God love him, while Dean can often be found on the local pub. Lee has been at City since 2016 and at 37 he's one of the youngest bosses on the list. 5 years ago he'd just been given his first gig in management at Oldham Athletic. Derby County, Frank Lampard. The most decorated man in this list when it comes to his playing days anyway. All eyes on Frank Lampard this season to see if he's the next big thing in management or if he's going to wind up like Paul Clement and get booted out by an impatient Derby board about 20 minutes after he takes down the Christmas tree. 5 years ago, Lampard was still at Chelsea. This would be his last season at a club he'd been at since 2001. But such was his loyalty to the club, he went on TalkSport and told the world that if he were to leave, he would not be signing for a Premier League rival. Oh dear, well, this is just a bit awkward. Hull City, Nigel Atkins. 5 years ago, Nigel Atkins was one of the most sympathetic characters in English football. The ingratitude shown by Southampton was staggering. This was a man who'd hauled them from League 1 into the Premier League, was keeping them there, and then he was sacked in January in favour of some bearded Wolverine from La Liga, and he couldn't even speak English. Atkins' stock was high, so he had a Premier League job again in a matter of weeks. He was then relegated with Reading. Ipswich Town, Paul Hurst. So Ipswich finally have a new manager after an era of Mick McCarthy. It's not going well. Paul Hurst is the name. You might remember him for such famous spells as Shrewsbury Town and Grimsby. Inspiring stuff. It's almost as if that club has just stopped trying now. 5 years ago, he was at Grimsby. Leeds United, Marcelo Bielsa. I'm still not really sure how Marcelo Bielsa has ended up in the Championship. Something tells me he won't be there for long, but Leeds fans must be pinching themselves. The experienced Argentine, with accolades coming out of his ears, had just left Athletic Bilbao in the summer 2013 and actually spent that season out of work before Marseille came calling. Something tells me he didn't spend it covered in Cheetos watching Jeremy Kyle though. Middlesbrough, Tony Pulis. Yes, Tony Pulis' mind-numbing brand of football is enough to make you want to shove pieces of lead into your eyeballs, but don't. It usually pays off for promotion and subsequent survival in the end. 5 years ago, the Welshman had just been sacked by Stoke City for the second time after they'd finally sobered up and realised they could do better than Pulis ball, despite the fact that they'd have still been stuck in the bottom half of the Championship without that tactic. And hey, look where they are without him. In November 2013, he was handed the impossible task of keeping a seemingly doomed Crystal Palace up, a club who had nearly driven Ian Holloway insane. And he did. Millwall, Neil Harris. Neil Harris is doing a smashing job at Millwall. The 41-year-old is Millwall, in total he spent 10 years there as a player, and back in 2013 he was coaching the under-21s. He's so far ingrained in the ethos of that club, I wouldn't be surprised if when he goes home he just starts throwing bottles of piss at old men as he crosses the street. Just kidding, Millwall fans, of course. I'm sure you're all lovely, gentle-hearted people, or at least that's what your parole officer says. Norwich City, Daniel Farke. 5 years ago he was managing SV Lippstadt 08, somewhere off the west coast of nowhere in Germany. Nope, I've never heard of them either. Nottingham Forest, Eidur Karanka is a man whose football is not easy on the eye, which is part of the reason why he was chased out of Middlesbrough with a rusty fork. and then they only went and appointed Tony Pulis later down the line. Makes perfect sense to me. In 2013, he'd just been sacked as assistant boss for Real Madrid after Jose Mourinho's departure, and instead of following him to Chelsea, went about carving out a managerial career at the Riverside. Preston North End Alex Neil. 5 years ago, nobody outside of Scotland knew who the hell Alex Neil was. Well, maybe a few Barnsley fans from back in the day, but still nobody else. In May 2013, he was appointed Hamilton Academical boss at the age of 31. 31, Christ, he was only a baby. Anyway, he went and led the club to promotion in his first season. Not bad. QPR Steve McClaren. I'll tell you where Steve McClaren was 10 years ago. Still wondering how on earth he got that England job. 5 years ago, he just replaced Nigel Clough as Derby County manager in a flip-flop relationship that saw him sacked about 12 times despite regularly challenging for promotion. Good luck, Frank. Reading Paul Clement. 5 years ago, Paul Clement still had hopes and dreams of becoming a half-decent manager. Alright, a bit harsh, but back in 2013, he was Carlo Ancelotti's right-hand man at Real Madrid. He'd also been assistant boss at PSG, Chelsea and, well, Blackburn, so the man had worked with some serious players and Benjani. Now he's at Reading with a bunch of sackings staining his CV. Rather than Paul Warren. Is it just me, or is there a lot of Pauls in this list? Christ above, you'd swear it was a goddamn Team 10 house or something. Anyway, Paul Warren, 5 years ago, he was doing nothing. He just retired in May 2012 and wouldn't get the Rotherham job until 2016, so I don't know what he was doing. Ask his wife. Sheffield United, Chris Wilder. 5 years ago, Chris Wilder, who has worked miracles at Sheffield United by the way, was trying and failing to get Oxford United out of League 2. Sheffield Wednesday, Jos Luhukai. Yes, Jos Luhukai might look like a man who your parents warned you not to accept sweets from, but the man does have a half-decent CV to back up his credentials. The Sheffield Wednesday boss, who once succeeded the legendary Jupp Heynckes 10 years ago, was the Hertha Berlin boss in 2013, where they just broke the record for the most points in the second division of German football with 76. Doesn't seem that high. Stoke City, Gary Rowett. So how long until Gary Rowett gets sacked? And then that'll just be him done, I think, as far as that promising managerial career goes. Anyway, 5 years ago, the man was the manager of Burton Albion. And yes, kids, there were some rare intervals where Nigel Clough did not have his claws firmly sunk into that club. Swansea City, Graham Potter. Not many English bosses start their managerial career in Sweden, nor do they stay there for 8 years, so fair play to Graham Potter. 5 years ago, that's exactly where he was, in his fourth season with Östersunds, after 2 successful promotions. Swansea fans will be hoping for more of the same. West Brom, Darren Moore. Big Darren Moore, the newest manager on the list, who really only became one due to Alan Pardew's sheer incompetence. 5 years ago, the big man was pulling on the boots at the age of 39 for Wellington Amateurs, before getting into coaching at West Brom. Wigan Athletic, Paul Cook. It's only right we finish off the list with yet another Paul.
Hey, yo, good morning, low gang, what's poppin'?
No, not you, never you. Paul Cook is the current Wigan boss and is the only man to have coached in Ireland, having spent 5 years as the manager of Sligo Rovers. By 2013, no, he was Chesterfield boss and had them winning League 2 that season.